Hello and welcome, fellow operating Thetans, to the first episode of Treatment Integrity, a personal implementation journey through pseudoscience. Each episode will explore the history and application of various fake sciences, fad treatments, and new religions. In this episode, we'll dive headfirst into Dianetics, specifically L. Ron Hubbard's bold and concerning self-help book, Self-Analysis. L. Ron Hubbard was a mediocre science fiction writer, but a top-grade con man. Despite the massive harm his actions have caused, LRH remains abhorrently fascinating to me. If you have read any of the myriad exposés on Scientology, or watched any of the docuseries cataloging the church's many offenses, you no doubt remember Hubbard. His unshakable confidence, his constant lying, the unknowable aspect ratio of his yellow teeth. It's hard to forget someone who tried to take over the government of Rhodesia with a crew of new agey hipsters who pledged to spend 1 billion years of their lives throwing their fellow adherents overboard and confessing their thought crimes into a pair of soup cans. As lurid as the Sea Org and Scientology are, I am more interested in the initial idea that made Hubbard so much money and lent him so much credibility as a mental health guru. I'm talking about Dianetics, an alternative psychology, complete with its own theory and treatment system, devised by Hubbard. Dianetics is as needlessly complicated as it is unburdened by evidence, but I will try to summarize its key concepts. First, Dianetics argues that the main purpose of human thought and behavior is to survive. So far, so obvious. Hubbard argues that human beings are innately perfect in their ability to survive, which he often refers to as handling the world around them. This perfection is caused by the analytical mind, a mental construct that can perfectly analyze a situation using reason and allow a person to act to bend their environment to suit themselves. This analytical mind is responsible for thinking, planning, and reasoning, and it represents the best of humanity. However, this perfect thinking machine is often undermined by a second mind, the reactive mind. The reactive mind records harmful memories when a person experiences stress and trauma. These recordings, called engrams, are then recalled when that person contacts situations similar to the initial offending event. When this happens, the reactive mind takes over the person's free will, making that person act irrationally, angry, and imperfectly. In Hubbard's view, the reactive mind is responsible for all of our psychological distress. To combat the maladaptive control exerted by our reactive minds, Hubbard created Dianetic therapy, a set of procedures in which an auditee systematically recalls past stressors in order to weaken their harmful effects on their behavior. Sometimes this therapy was delivered with a second person, acting as an auditor, using an e-meter to monitor the auditee's electrical resistance to detect the presence of engrams. Hubbard says that this act of recalling, recording, and computing past experiences expunges the engrams from our reactive minds, and it causes our brains to refile those negative experiences where they belong. Hubbard assures us in the pages of Dianetics that lots and lots of data support his conclusions and show Dianetic therapy to be a near infallible cure for everything from depression to, quote, mental derangement. He essentially says, oh, you don't want to see the boring graphs and numbers. Don't worry about it. I did the research. It checks out. You're good. Did you see that vol? But most of all, Dianetics was meant to be fun. It was a defiant smack in the face to established therapy. You, yourself, could do Dianetics on yourself and your loved ones and your neighbors. You didn't even need to go back to school. You can just read one book and take a seminar and then start hypnotizing your friends with a shitty lie detector. Dianetics came to all of the seekers and the needy, and it said, hey, you want to change the world, right? Then do it. This is the psychology of the masses. Following the establishment of Dianetics, Hubbard wrote a slimmer companion book called Self-Analysis to allow interested parties to use basic Dianetic auditing alone as a self-help treatment. Some quick internet research showed that some Scientologists on Reddit consider this book unrepresentative of Scientology in general, and they mean that in a good way. Over on Goodreads, Hubbard's Self-Analysis is sitting at a respectable 3.8 stars out of 5. However, I should point out that many of these positive reviews were submitted by committed Scientologists who are often tasked with buying multiple copies of Hubbard's books and leaving glowing reviews in order to strengthen the movement. Funnily enough, one of these reviewers pointed out a core peculiarity in Dianetics. Dianetics equates optimal mental health with an ability to perfectly remember every experience you've had. It's one of the quasi-superpowers that Hubbard claims his therapies can produce. But among the hundreds of reviews, Rita R. seems to be the only one who realizes that perfect memory is a really shitty superpower. Godspeed, Rita. Still, self-analysis promises a lot, including a vague 80% improvement in overall adaptability. Let's see if L. Ron can fix me. Dianetics uses an obscure measurement system called the Hubbard chart of human evaluation. It's a sort of chart in which you rate your current performance according to the infamous tone scale across 24 different domains like value as a friend, persistence, and sexual behavior / attitude toward children. Elron, I really would have split up that last category if I were you. Just a note. Once you have scored yourself on all 24 dimensions, you draw a line through the apparent average level of your performance to obtain your current position on the tone scale. This is your baseline. Next, it's on to the actual auditing. And here I need to clarify something. Despite the book being called Self-Analysis, Hubbard says that you are not actually auditing yourself. He argues that you are being audited by L. Ron Hubbard through his words, through the actual text of the book. Anyway, what does this self-auditing therapy actually look like? Well, you sit down with one of many lists included in the book, as well as a fun little therapy disc that apparently comes with the physical book. Side note, I wouldn't actually know. I pirated a PDF version of this so I wouldn't have to pay Scientology any actual money. Regardless, you sit down in a quiet environment with a list of memory prompts in your therapy disc. The memory prompts are instructions to remember a certain event. These include instructions like, recall a time you felt happy, or recall a time you were enjoying it. The disc, meanwhile, lists a sensation like touch, or taste, or smell, or bodily motion. You read each memory prompt in the list, one by one, and combine it with the sense on the therapy disc to determine what kind of memory to recall and what sensations you should focus on. For example, if the memory prompt is recall a time you tamed an animal, and the disc shows color, you might try to recall the color of fur of a dog you once trained. Once you have successfully come up with one sense memory for that prompt, you are expected to stay on that prompt and try to recover another sense memory from earlier in your life. Repeat this process over and over again until you have recovered the earliest sense memory that fits the prompt. If you cannot remember anything that fits the prompt, you are expected to imagine a fictitious scenario that fits the prompt. We'll come back to this part later.
Simple to handle any outnesses in that.
The idea is to recall the memory sensation combinations for each item on one list each session. Over the many sessions you are expected to complete, you do this again and again with new lists. You may also repeat lists as long as you try to come up with new memory sensation combinations, I guess by spinning your disc a couple more times. Hubbard warns that recalling these potential engrams can be distressing, and in classic L. Ron fashion, he insinuates that auditing can even drive people crazy if they're, quote, not ready for it. So, he thoughtfully included a special list for calming you down if the auditing stresses you out. Overall, I can't say self-auditing moved me up the tone scale or improved my well-being by 80%. However, the experience of auditing itself generally wasn't too bad. It was mostly quiet, sitting at my desk trying to remember inconsequential things. It was like taking a test I didn't care about. The list items ranged from mundane, recall a time you threw something away, to unintentionally hilarious, recall a time you enjoyed a good loaf, to shockingly brutal, recall a time you made an enemy scream. It seems pretty telling that Hubbard included multiple items about harming your enemies in these self-help lists. He must have thought making your enemies bleed was a relatable experience. These items were presented one after another, causing crazy tonal shifts. It was like listening to some new, soothing, new age sleep app that asks you to contemplate in this order: the beauty of the ocean's surface, the profundity of its depths, the gratifying rush of slaughtering a whale. Still, I can see the appeal of Dianetic self-auditing. The quiet time inherent in it can be peaceful, and it's a lot easier than transcendental meditation. Plus, it comes with a fun toy. As far as my responses to these questions were concerned, they followed a consistent pattern. When recalling the sense memories, recent events really stood out. I was much more likely to remember an instance when I was adroit from 2 weeks ago instead of 2 years ago. However, Alron said we were not supposed to settle for recent memories. Instead, we're supposed to go all the way back in time. In my experience, this was a fruitless endeavor. It's simply harder to accurately remember mundane events that are so old they're no longer relevant to your life. There's a good reason why I don't think about, quote, a time I threw something away I didn't want back when I was a toddler. That knowledge has never been necessary for me to live my life. Interestingly, when I did attempt to follow the protocol correctly by recalling the earliest memory, I found myself making things up, using real memories as a scaffold and sketching in falsehoods to fill those gaps. Importantly, you can sketch in those phony details any way you want, giving you authorship over your past. Free license to reinvent yourself, all with the explicit approval of a supposed mental health expert. After all, LRH told us to imagine new memories when we cannot recall real ones. This truly is psychology as imagined by the world's finest con artist. Overall, how was self-auditing? It was mostly quiet, frequently boring. Some of these lists are over 200 items long. The last line in my journal of these experiences just reads, "I feel fine, I guess." That about sums it up. Dianetic self-auditing is easy to make fun of. Hubbard's writing is bizarre and long-winded. He jumps schizophrenically from vague self-help platitudes about getting yourself ready to handle your environment, to swashbuckling anecdotes that begin, "On Lake Tanganyika, the natives have a very interesting way of catching fish." He desperately wants to be a combination of Freud and Indiana Jones. The book is frequently hilarious, but never on purpose. At one point, Hubbard's theoretical ramblings ironically foreshadowed the giant swindle he was running. When discussing Dianetic techniques for freeing yourself from the control of your enemies, and again, Hubbard is obsessed with secret enemies, Alron writes, "By the trick of language, then, and a magical, wholly unsubstantial trick that is, men seek to order the lives of men for their own advantage, and men caged about by the shadows observe and believe it to their own detriment." Kind of prophetic, huh? In other places, Hubbard accidentally lampshades how boring his lists can be. In one set of instructions, he says that yawns and other symptoms of fatigue are actually a good thing. They show that the process is working and will go away if you just keep auditing yourself. Convenient. In another place, Hubbard asks you to recall a time in which you were glad it was over. Coming up with a memory for that was not that hard. However, Dianetic self-analysis should not be laughed off entirely. It is crucial to remember that these ideas and techniques led to the creation of a massive, secretive, and destructive cult that Hubbard used to rob scores of people who sought help for themselves. And it was all the more devastating that Alron was creative with his fake science. At every turn, his therapies included fun props like e-meters and therapy discs. It promised easy personal empowerment, allowing anyone to assume the social cachet of a trained master of the mind without actually receiving any training. And most of all, his Dianetic theory, untethered from the need for evidence, gave people authorship over their past and their future. Dianetics argued that old memories and experiences could and should be recalled, refashioned, and rewritten to better suit the person you wanted to be. With this license to sever your well-being from reality, Hubbard gave us a truly modern doctrine, a psychology of selfishness. If you have any ideas or requests, for pseudoscientific treatments I should try next, please leave them in the comments. Right now, I am working on episodes for neurolinguistic programming, lucid dreaming, and self-hypnosis. Thanks for watching.